The unexpected invitation. David Connors never thought a simple trip could change his life forever. But life has a strange way of surprising us. It all started with a blinking message on his phone. Congratulations, you have won a ticket to Zalora Prime, the homeworld of the friendly alien race, the Zilari. David blinked. He remembered entering a contest months ago when Earth announced its cultural exchange with Zalora. Humans had met the Zilari only 10 years ago, and now the two species were building strong ties. David had always been curious about aliens, but he never expected to actually visit their world. He packed quickly, feeling a strange excitement. Zalora Prime was known for its glowing forests, floating cities, and peaceful people. But he had no idea this trip would lead him to something much bigger, and far more dangerous. The journey through the space portal was quick but disorienting. One moment, David stood in a white chamber on Earth. The next, he stepped out into a bustling alien city. He gasped. Towering crystal buildings stretched into a sky painted in shades of violet and gold. Hovering platforms carried beings across the city. The air smelled sweet, like fresh rain and wildflowers. Strange plants glowed softly along the streets. A Zilari guide named Terran greeted him. Terran was tall and thin, with silver skin and eyes like glowing moons. "Welcome to Zalora Prime," Terran said, voice smooth and calm. "Today, you are lucky. It is the day of eternal bonding, a sacred celebration. Would you like to watch the ceremony?" David hesitated. "Is it okay for a human to attend?" Terran smiled. "Of course, it is a day of unity." Curiosity won. David followed Terran through glowing streets until they reached a grand plaza. Thousands of Zilari stood around a massive stone platform. On the platform stood a glowing orb as large as a person, floating silently. The crowd hummed softly, like bees in a hive. The air crackled with energy. Terran whispered, "The orb will choose the eternal bond for this generation. The bond connects two souls forever to protect our world. Usually, it chooses two Zilari warriors." David nodded, fascinated. The orb pulsed with blue light. It hovered over the crowd like a curious eye. The humming grew louder. Then the orb moved. The crowd gasped. The orb floated past rows of tall Zilari. It drifted closer and closer, until it stopped directly in front of David. His heart raced. I think there's a mistake." The orb glowed brighter, spinning slowly in the air. "David Connors," a voice echoed from the orb, though it had no mouth. "You are chosen as the bridegroom of the eternal bond." The plaza fell into silence. David felt every eye turn toward him. Sweat rolled down his neck. "Bridegroom? What does that mean?" Terran looked as shocked as David. "The orb, it never chooses outsiders. But this means you are to bond with the chosen bride." David shook his head. "That can't be right. I'm just a tourist." Suddenly, a group of tall, armored Zilari guards appeared. Their eyes glowed like ice. "Come with us, human," one of the guards said. David backed away. "Wait, I didn't agree to this." The guards moved closer. The orb floated beside them, pulsing with every step. "David Connors," the orb said again, "the bond has begun." Before David could react, the guards grabbed his arms. The crowd parted as they marched him toward a towering palace with spires like crystal spears. His heart pounded. He tried to resist, but the guards were stronger than they looked. "What is this bond? What does it mean?" he asked, voice shaking. One guard glanced at him with something like pity. "The eternal bond connects two souls, forever. It is a great honor and a great danger." Danger. David's stomach twisted. The palace gates opened, revealing a long hall bathed in blue light. At the end of the hall stood a figure, tall and elegant, with skin like liquid silver and eyes that glowed blue. The figure turned toward David. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "This is Cirrus, the chosen bride," said the guard. David tried to speak, but no words came out. Ceres stepped forward. Her voice was soft but clear. "You are not the one we expected, human, but the bond has chosen you." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "And now we are both in danger." The ground trembled beneath them. A low rumble echoed through the palace. Ceres's eyes widened. They know the bond has formed. The rebels are coming. David's mind spun. Rebels. Danger. Eternal bond. He had only come for a simple tour, but now he was standing beside an alien bride he never agreed to marry. And people wanted him dead for it. The alien bride. The palace trembled as the distant rumble grew louder. David's heart raced. He didn't know much about aliens, bonds, or this strange ceremony, but he understood the sound of danger. "Who's coming?" he asked, his voice cracking. Ceres's eyes glowed faintly as she turned toward the window. Outside, the sky had shifted from its soft violet to a deep, angry red. "The Riven," she said, voice low. "Rebel extremists who reject human contact. They fear the bond, and they will do anything to stop it." The word bond echoed in David's head. He had heard it so many times already, but he still didn't understand what it truly meant. "But why do they care about me? I didn't ask for any bond. I didn't even want to come to this ceremony." Ceres's lips tightened. The eternal bond is ancient. It doesn't follow rules. It chooses two souls who are strong enough to protect Zilara from danger. But this time, the bond chose a human instead of a Zilari. The Riven see that as a threat. The ground shook again. This time, David heard the sharp hum of engines outside the palace. The guards tensed, gripping their sleek, curved weapons. "Princess Ceres," said one of the guards, "we must leave. The Riven have deployed grav mines around the perimeter." Ceres nodded and turned toward David. "Stay close. We're running out of time." Before David could ask what grav mines were, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him down a side corridor. The walls glowed faintly with blue veins of energy, casting strange shadows. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers like cold metal cables against his skin. "Wait, wait," David gasped as they sprinted past towering pillars. "Where are we going?" "To the catacombs," Ceres said without looking back. "Ancient tunnels beneath the city. If we reach them, we might escape the Riven." The air grew hotter as they ran. The hum of engines grew louder. David stole a glance through a narrow window as they passed. Outside, black, insect-like ships hovered over the plaza. Streams of red light rained down from their bellies, striking the ground with explosive force. Zilari citizens scattered in panic as statues crumbled and crystal towers cracked. His heart clenched. All this, because of me. Ceres yanked him into a narrow stairwell. The steps spiraled down endlessly, lit only by faint blue lights in the walls. Their footsteps echoed as they descended. David's legs burned. His breath grew shallow. How far down are we going?" he asked between gasps. "Far enough," Ceres said, voice tight. "The Riven can track energy signatures. The deeper we go, the harder it is for them to find us." David felt a sudden chill. "Wait, if they track energy, won't they track this bond thing between us?" Ceres hesitated mid-step. It was the first time she showed uncertainty. "Yes," she said softly. "They can, if they have the right equipment. The bond isn't just emotional or spiritual. It's psychic. Energy flows between us now. Thoughts, senses, instincts. If they have a bond disruptor, they might use it to locate us." David's stomach dropped. "And if they disrupt it? Then the bond breaks, and the psychic backlash could kill us both." David froze. "Kill us." "Keep moving, David," Ceres snapped, pulling him forward again. They reached the bottom of the stairwell, where a massive circular door blocked their path. Ancient symbols glowed faintly on its surface. Ceres placed her palm against the door. The symbols shifted, rearranging into a pattern. The stone rumbled, then slid open, revealing a dark tunnel beyond. The cool, damp air hit David like a wave. The walls glistened as though covered in moisture, though the surface felt smooth and metallic under his fingers. "This tunnel leads to the old city," Saris said as they entered. "Coronis, the first Zilari settlement. The Riven won't expect us to go there." David exhaled shakily. "Okay, fine. Let's go there. But you need to explain what's really happening. What is this bond? Why me? I'm no soldier. I can't fight rebels." Saris kept walking for a few moments in silence. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer. "The eternal bond doesn't choose based on physical strength alone. It chooses those with the strength of spirit. Humans have survived wars, disasters, and endless struggles. The bond saw that strength in you. Me? I'm just an engineer. I fix machines, not fight aliens." The bond saw something more. She turned toward him. "When the orb touched you, the bond was sealed. We are now connected. You feel it, don't you?" David frowned. He wanted to deny it, but deep down, something had shifted. He felt aware of her. He could sense her tension like a static charge in the air. And when he looked into her eyes, the fear she tried to hide was as clear as his own heartbeat. "I don't know what I feel," he admitted. "That's normal," Saris said. "The bond will grow stronger with time, but we need to survive long enough for that." A distant hum made Saris stop. Her eyes widened. David heard it too. A deep, vibrating sound that resonated through the walls. Saris cursed in her native language. "They found us." The tunnel ahead glowed red. Metal spikes burst from the walls, crackling with energy. "Grav mines," Saris shouted. "Move." The mines activated, pulling at David like invisible hands. His legs grew heavy. His body felt like it weighed a ton. His feet stuck to the floor. Saris reached for him, straining against the invisible force. "You have to fight it," she cried. "The bond can help." David gritted his teeth. The pressure was crushing his chest. Then, for the first time, he focused on the strange connection he felt with Saris. He imagined her strength flowing into him like a warm current. His legs tingled. The weight lessened. He lunged forward, grabbing her hand. The grav mines exploded behind them, sending shockwaves through the tunnel. They collapsed behind a stone pillar, gasping for air. David met Saris's eyes. "Okay," he said, chest heaving. "I believe you now. The bond is real." Saris smiled faintly. "Good. Now we need to survive long enough to learn how to use it properly." Escape and revelation. The voice echoed through the tunnel like a whisper made of ice. "Found you." David's blood froze. The voice didn't come from the tunnel itself. It came from inside his mind. The sensation was sickening, like cold tendrils probing through his thoughts without permission. Saris's eyes widened. "They're in the bond," she whispered. Her voice trembled with fear. "The Riven have a psychic tracker. We're not just being followed. They're reading our thoughts." David clutched his head as the cold pressure intensified. The voice returned, clearer now. "You don't belong here, human. You think you can steal our bond. We will tear your mind apart." The pressure became unbearable. David fell to his knees, gasping. Images flashed through his mind. Fire raining from the sky, Zilari cities reduced to ash, and shadowy figures with glowing red eyes. Saris dropped beside him, gripping his shoulders. "David, listen to me. They are using fear to break you. The bond gives us strength, but only if we trust it. Push them out. Focus on me." Her voice was an anchor in the storm of panic swirling through his mind. David locked his gaze on hers. The cold faded slightly. "How do I push them out?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Imagine a wall," Saris said urgently. "Picture a solid wall around your mind. Don't let their voice pass through." David squeezed his eyes shut and pictured a massive wall of steel rising in his mind. The icy whispers scratched at the edges, but the more he focused, the fainter they became. The pressure lifted. Saris exhaled. Good. You did it. But the relief in her eyes was short-lived. She turned toward the tunnel entrance. The shadow moved closer. A figure stepped into view. He was tall and thin, with armor that shimmered like liquid night. His skin was pale gray, and his eyes glowed crimson. In one hand, he held a curved black weapon. In the other, a small device pulsed with red light. "Run," Ceres whispered. They sprinted deeper into the tunnel. Behind them, the Riven soldier raised his weapon. A high-pitched screech filled the air. A red beam struck the wall beside them, turning stone into molten slag. David's lungs burned as they ran. The tunnel curved sharply, opening into a wide chamber. The broken stone bridge stretched across a dark chasm. "Jump," Ceres shouted. David didn't stop to think. He followed her, pushing off with all his strength. For a terrifying moment, he hung in the air over endless darkness. Then Ceres caught his arm, pulling him to safety. The Riven soldier reached the edge and aimed his weapon. Before he fired, Ceres pulled a small disc from her belt and threw it across the gap. The disc exploded in a burst of blue energy. The bridge collapsed, sending the soldier tumbling into the chasm. David lay on his back, panting. "Please tell me, that's the only one." Ceres shook her head. "The Riven hunt in packs. He was a scout. The others won't be far." The reality of the situation hit David like a punch to the chest. He was on an alien planet, being hunted by psychic extremists because of a bond he never wanted. And the only person who understood it was a silver-skinned alien princess. "Why me?" he muttered. "Why would this bond pick me?" Ceres hesitated. The eternal bond chooses protectors. Usually, it bonds two Zellari warriors to defend the energy core of our world. But this time, it chose you. I don't know why. But the bond never makes mistakes. "Yeah, well, it sure feels like one." Ceres placed a hand on his shoulder. "I feel your doubt. The bond makes our emotions open to each other. Your fear, your confusion. It's normal. But you also have courage." The bond saw that. David wanted to argue, but something in her eyes made him stop. There was no mockery or judgment, only trust. He stood up and looked around. "Okay, what now? We can't stay here." "Coronis," Ceres said. "The old city is close. If we reach the ancient Nexus chamber, we can block their psychic link. Lead the way." They continued through the maze of tunnels until the air grew colder. Faint lights appeared ahead. The tunnel opened into a vast underground city. Coronis. The city was built from dark stone, with wide streets and towering structures covered in glowing blue runes. The architecture was different from the crystal elegance of the capital. It was older, heavier, and more imposing. David whistled softly. "This place looks ancient." "It is," Ceres said. "Coronis was the first settlement when our ancestors arrived from the stars. The Nexus here once powered the eternal bond across the planet." They hurried toward the central plaza. In the center stood a massive monolith, with runes swirling across its surface. Ceres placed her hands on the stone. "The Nexus recognizes bonded pairs," she explained. "It can amplify our connection, or shield it from intruders." The runes glowed brighter under her touch. David felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest. Suddenly, the air grew heavy. The warmth vanished, replaced by an oppressive chill. The Nexus went dark. "No," Ceres whispered. "Something's wrong." A deep, mocking voice filled the plaza. "You shouldn't have come here, princess." David spun around. A figure stepped from the shadows. This soldier was taller than the first. His armor was black with crimson veins pulsing along the surface. His eyes glowed with a sharp predatory light. Ceres tensed. "Varrak," she hissed. David recognized the name from her thoughts. Varrak, the leader of the Riven. Varrak smiled, revealing sharp metallic teeth. "You bonded with a human," he said with disgust. "Do you know what you've done? The bond was our strength, our purity. And now you've corrupted it with this. Outsider. It was not my choice, Saris said, stepping protectively in front of David. The bond chose him. Varric sneered. But we can fix that. We will break the bond and rip his mind apart in the process. Varric raised his hand. The air turned electric. David screamed as the cold returned, stabbing into his mind like needles. Saris reached for him. Their hands met. The pain lessened, but Varric's power grew stronger. The Nexus stone trembled. Give up, Varric's voice whispered in David's head. You're just a human. You can't survive this. David clenched his jaw. He was scared. But the bond pulsed between him and Saris, like a faint heartbeat. He focused on that rhythm. He imagined the steel wall again. He saw Saris beside him, not as an alien stranger, but as a partner. Together, they pushed back. The Nexus roared to life. Energy surged from the stone, knocking Varric backward. The psychic pressure vanished. Varric stood, eyes narrowing. This isn't over, he growled, then melted into the shadows. The Nexus stabilized. The bond between David and Saris felt stronger now, clearer. David sagged against the stone. We beat him, for now. Saris nodded. But Varric won't stop. He knows the bond is stronger than he expected. He'll come again, with more force. David looked at her, breathing heavily. Then we need to figure out how to fight back. Together. She squeezed his hand. Yes, together. The rebel leader. The holographic image of Earth's orbital station burned in the air before them. Flames devoured the steel ring that once floated peacefully above the planet. Debris drifted through space like shattered glass. David felt his chest tighten. Earth. They're attacking Earth. Saris's silver skin paled. Varric was stalling us. The Riven didn't just come for the bond. They want to cripple the human alliance. The hologram shifted. A fleet of black, insect-like ships appeared near Earth's moon, their sleek forms glowing with crimson energy. David clenched his fists. We have to warn Earth. Saris turned to the Nexus stone. The Nexus can send a signal through the ancient communication lines. But if we do that, the Riven will know our exact location. David's heart raced. If they didn't send a warning, Earth could fall. If they did, the Riven would swarm them. We don't have a choice, he said. Saris nodded. Stay close to me. The bond will protect us. She placed both hands on the stone. The glowing runes shifted, swirling toward the center. David touched the stone beside her. The bond surged between them, his mind filled with fragments of Saris's memories, her training as a protector, her fear of disappointing her father, and her growing trust in him. The Nexus projected their message toward Earth, Riven fleet approaching. Immediate defensive action required. The message sent. The Nexus dimmed. The ground trembled beneath them. David looked at Saris. They're here. The tunnel to the surface exploded inward. Riven soldiers poured in, their armor glowing red. David grabbed a broken metal rod from the ground. Useless against their energy weapons, but it made him feel less helpless. Saris pulled a thin, curved blade from her waist. The blade vibrated softly, leaving faint blue streaks in the air. Stick close, she ordered. The soldiers charged. Saris moved like liquid metal. She ducked beneath an energy blast, her blade slicing through armor like paper. David swung his rod at a soldier's leg. It bounced harmlessly off the armor. The soldier aimed his weapon at David's chest. Saris threw her blade. The weapon lodged in the soldier's neck. The soldier collapsed with a metallic hiss. Behind you, David shouted. Saris spun as another soldier lunged. Too late. The soldier slammed a glowing device against Saris's shoulder. Energy crackled around her. She screamed and collapsed. David swung the rod at the soldier's head with everything he had. The soldier staggered. David swung again. And again. The soldier fell, unmoving. David dropped the rod and knelt beside Saris. Her body twitched as red energy pulsed through her veins. "Ceres, talk to me." Her eyes opened slightly. Neural disruptor, blocking the bond. David gritted his teeth. He could feel the bond like static in the back of his mind. But it was weak, fragmented. A deep voice echoed through the chamber. "Impressive, human. You've survived longer than I expected." David turned toward the sound. Varric stood at the far end of the plaza. His armor gleamed black, pulsing with crimson lines. His eyes locked onto David with cold amusement. "You did this," David said through clenched teeth. "Of course," Varric said. "The bond is a threat to Zalara's purity. And humans, you are parasites. Weak, fragile, but stubborn." David stood, legs shaking. "Why attack Earth? The bond has nothing to do with Earth." Varric laughed. "The bond connects not just minds, but worlds. The more humans join this alliance, the weaker we become. The eternal bond was meant for Zalari alone. Your people are like weeds, spreading through the stars. We're just pruning the garden." David's fists tightened. "You're killing innocent people." "Innocence." Varric tilted his head. "Your species destroys forests, oceans, entire ecosystems, and now you spread into the galaxy, building factories and warships. The bond chose you, a human, over a true Zalari warrior. It was a mistake, one I will correct." He raised his hand. The red lines on his armor pulsed brighter. David gasped as icy tendrils invaded his mind again. Varric's presence flooded his thoughts like black smoke. "You are weak, human. Just let go." David fell to his knees. His vision blurred. Panic tightened around his chest. "Fight," Ceres whispered. Her voice cut through the darkness like a spark of light. David grasped that spark and focused on it. The bond was weak, but it was there, a thread connecting him to Ceres. He reached for her hand. The warmth of her skin reignited the bond. The static cleared. Together, they pushed. The red tendrils shattered. Varric staggered back, eyes wide. "Impossible," he growled. Ceres stood, her legs shaky, but her eyes blazing blue. "You don't understand the bond, Varric," she said. "It's not about purity. It's about unity. Strength shared is strength doubled." Varric roared and lunged at them. David and Ceres moved together. She ducked low, sweeping Varric's legs. David grabbed the fallen soldier's weapon and fired. A blue energy blast hit Varric square in the chest. Varric collapsed, smoke rising from his armor. David bent over, gasping. Is he dead?" Ceres knelt beside Varric. She placed her hand on his forehead. Her eyes closed. "No," she said softly. "He projected part of his consciousness into the bond. He's still out there, and he knows we sent the warning." David's heart sank, which means Earth isn't just being attacked. They're walking into a trap. Ceres stood. "We have to get to the orbital portal. It's the only way to reach Earth in time." "But the Riven fleet is already there," David said. Ceres looked toward the ceiling, where faint cracks of light filtered through the stone. "Then we go through them." The corrupted bond. The hologram shimmered in the cool air of the Nexus chamber, displaying the nightmare unfolding above Earth. The Riven fleet hovered like a swarm of predatory insects, releasing red energy beams into the atmosphere. Cities burned. Earth's defense platforms fired desperately, but the alien ships moved with cold precision, dodging or deflecting every strike. David clenched his fists. "Earth doesn't stand a chance if we don't stop them." Ceres stood beside him, eyes glowing faintly. "The Riven are using psychic disruptors to block communications and disable defensive systems. The bond core here was just the beginning. They're targeting the heart of Earth's orbital defense network." David shook his head. "Why? What does the bond have to do with Earth's defense systems?" Ceres placed a hand on the Nexus stone. "The bond is not just between us. It's a living energy field that connects minds. The Riven discovered how to turn that connection into a weapon. They're using the psychic energy of the bond to create confusion, spreading fear across Earth's defenders. Minds linked through neural implants are now compromised, making the soldiers hesitate, panic, and lose. David felt his stomach drop. They're turning our greatest strength into a weapon. Yes, Saris said softly. And if the bond between us breaks, they'll use the backlash to collapse Earth's defenses entirely. The realization struck David like a punch. The Riven weren't just attacking Earth. They were using the eternal bond as a key to shatter the entire alliance. We need to reach the orbital portal, David said. But Verak won't stop hunting us. Sirris's eyes darkened. We won't outrun him. We'll have to outthink him. They moved quickly through the ancient streets of Coronis, staying close to the shadows. The underground city's silence felt oppressive, like the stone itself was holding its breath. David felt the bond between them grow stronger. Emotions passed through the invisible thread. Sirris's focused determination, her underlying fear, and the glimmer of trust she placed in him. But something else stirred in the bond. A faint, oily presence, cold and invasive. Verak, you can't escape me, his voice whispered in David's mind. The bond ties us together now. Your fear tastes delicious. David staggered. Pain shot through his skull. David? Saris stopped, gripping his arm. He shook his head, teeth clenched. Verak, he's in my head again. Sirris's jaw tightened. He's trying to corrupt the bond. If he succeeds, he'll control us both. How do we stop it? She hesitated. The bond is like a river. If we block his influence, we block our connection too. We'll lose the advantage of our shared awareness. Better disconnected than controlled, David said, voice grim. Saris raised her hand. Blue energy flickered between her fingers. She touched David's forehead. The warmth of the bond faded. The comforting sense of Saris's presence vanished. David shivered. That feels wrong. It is wrong, Saris said softly, but it's the only way to survive. They reached a maintenance corridor leading toward the old transport hub. The door was sealed with thick metal plates and ancient runes. Saris placed her hands on the surface. The metal hummed, then slid open with a grinding noise. Beyond the door stood a massive underground hangar. A sleek, disc-shaped craft rested on a platform in the center. David's eyes widened. Is that a ship? A Skyrunner, Saris confirmed. Fast, stealth-capable. If we reach the surface, we can intercept the orbital portal. They sprinted toward the craft. Saris climbed into the cockpit while David followed, taking the co-pilot's seat. The controls glowed with soft blue light. Hold tight, Saris said. The Skyrunner hummed to life. The hangar floor split apart, revealing a vertical launch shaft lined with glowing rings. The ship shot upward, pressing David into his seat. The tunnel blurred past them. In seconds, they burst through a hidden surface hatch into the open sky. The sight took David's breath away. Zillara Prime stretched below them, its crystal cities glowing beneath swirling violet clouds. Above, the Riven fleet hung like a vast black net. Stealth mode activated, Saris said, flipping a switch. The ship shimmered and vanished from sight. The main orbital portal loomed ahead, a colossal, floating ring crackling with blue lightning. We're almost there, Saris said. David's mind ached. The psychic pressure returned, stronger now. Did you think you could hide from me? Verak's voice slithered into his thoughts. David squeezed his eyes shut. He's back. Saris, he's stronger this time. Saris's hands tightened on the controls. He's using the bond itself. If he breaches the connection, he'll take full control of your mind. The ship trembled. Lights flickered. He's already inside the systems, Saris said. He's trying to lock us out. David gripped the console. How do we stop him? Saris's eyes hardened. We go to the core. We let him in. David stared at her. Let him in. Are you insane? The bond core is built on shared consciousness, Saris explained. If we invite him into the core, we can trap him. But what if he traps us instead? Saris met his gaze. We fight together. We trust the bond. David's pulse raced. The idea was insane. But Saris hadn't led him wrong yet. Do it, he said. Saris placed her palms on the console. Blue light poured from her hands. The bond core awakened. David gasped as the psychic walls collapsed. The bond rushed back with overwhelming force. He felt Saris's resolve, her fear, and her fierce determination to protect her people. But another presence flooded in, cold, sharp, and hateful. Varric. Ah, there you are, Varric sneered. You opened the door. Now I'll walk through. The ship shuddered. Varric's voice became a storm of pain, ripping through David's mind. Images of Earth burning flooded his senses. The fear was suffocating. Saris's voice pierced the darkness. David, focus on me. He clung to the thread of her voice. Varric loomed in the psychic space, a towering figure with eyes of molten red. You cannot fight me, Varric said. This bond is mine now. David's thoughts blurred. The bond shifted, twisting into something cold and brittle. No, David growled. This bond belongs to us, not you. Varric laughed. Then break it, if you can. David glanced toward Saris. He could feel her strength beside him. The bond wasn't just psychic energy. It was trust, unity. David pushed all his fear into the bond and transformed it into defiance. Together, he and Saris poured their combined strength into the core. The psychic energy surged like a supernova. Varric screamed as the wave of energy engulfed him. The ship stabilized. The bond snapped back into place, stronger than before. David gasped for air. Did it work? Saris opened her eyes. Varric's psychic link is gone. We trapped his mind in the bond core. He can't control the Riven anymore. The ship's alarm blared. On the main display, Earth appeared ahead. The Riven fleet hovered above it, disorganized and confused without Varric's guidance. Earth's forces are regaining control, Saris said, but they still need help. David gripped the controls. Then let's give them some. The Skyrunner shot toward the battle. The final confrontation. The Skyrunner shot through the void toward Earth, leaving the violet skies of Zilara Prime behind. The stars blurred into silver streaks as the ship's engines roared. David sat rigid in the co-pilot's chair, staring at the image on the display. Earth was no longer the familiar blue marble he remembered. Dark shadows coiled around the planet like a tightening fist. The Riven fleet hovered in orbit, releasing crimson beams into Earth's upper atmosphere. Atmospheric disruption, Saris said, adjusting the controls. They're heating the ionosphere to block communications. If they succeed, Earth's defenses will go blind. How much time do we have? David asked. Minutes, Saris answered. Maybe less. David rubbed his temples. The psychic strain from their battle with Varric still throbbed behind his eyes. The bond between him and Saris felt stronger than before, but now it carried a faint, ominous undercurrent. Varric's parting words echoed in his mind. I left a gift in the bond. What do you think he meant? David asked, glancing at Saris. She hesitated. Varric was a master of psychic warfare. He could have planted a viral echo in the bond, something that grows over time, feeding off our connection. David swallowed, like a psychic bomb. Yes, she said, and if it detonates, the energy backlash could kill us and disable Earth's planetary shield network. The ship trembled as they entered Earth's atmosphere. The view below shifted to chaos. New York City's skyline burned. Plasma beams carved deep scars into the landscape. David's heart tightened. That's my city, he whispered. Saris reached for his hand. The bond pulsed with warmth, pushing back the numb terror. We can stop this, she said. Together. David squeezed her hand. Let's end this. The ship streaked toward Earth's main defense platform. Atlas Station, an enormous ring-shaped fortress orbiting 200 miles above the surface. Atlas Station controls the global shield network, Saris explained. The Riven are trying to override it. If we take back control, Earth's defenses can push them out. David studied the display. The Riven have already boarded the station. Saris's jaw tightened. Then we board too. The Skyrunner approached the station under stealth. Through the viewport, David saw dozens of black Riven pods latched onto the hull like parasites. Saris guided the ship toward a maintenance hatch. The ship's landing clamps engaged with a metallic clunk. Once we're inside, Saris said, unstrapping her harness, the main command core is 3 decks down. That's where they'll deploy the psychic virus. David stood, wiping sweaty palms on his pants. Let's go save the world. The maintenance hatch opened into a dimly lit corridor. The air smelled of burning metal and scorched wiring. Saris led the way, holding her vibrating blade. David followed, gripping an energy pistol he'd taken from the Skyrunner's armory. The bond helped them move as one. When Saris paused, David instinctively halted. When she ducked into the shadows, David mirrored her without thinking. They reached an intersection. Saris closed her eyes. 4 Riven guards ahead. David aimed his pistol. We take them out quietly. They moved forward. The guards stood near a control terminal, their backs turned. David raised his pistol. His finger tightened on the trigger. Suddenly, pain stabbed into his skull. Did you think you could hide from me? Varek's voice sneered in his mind. David gasped, the pistol wavering. His vision blurred. The bond flared with chaotic energy. The guards turned. Move, Saris shouted. The guards raised their weapons. Red beams lanced toward them. Saris shoved David aside. Energy blasts struck the wall, showering molten debris. She lunged forward, her blade slicing through the first guard's armor. David, still dizzy from the psychic attack, fired blindly. A lucky shot hit the second guard in the chest. The remaining 2 guards retreated, calling for reinforcements. David staggered to his feet. He's in my head again, he said, voice shaky. Saris helped him stand. Varek is using the psychic echo to distract you. Fight it. David nodded, breathing hard. The cold presence of Varek slithered through his thoughts, whispering doubts and fears. You're weak, Varek hissed. She's only using you. The bond was never meant for humans. David clenched his fists. Shut up, he growled. Saris squeezed his arm. Ignore him. We're almost there. They hurried toward the command core. The core chamber was massive, with a towering central console surrounded by glowing energy conduits. Riven soldiers clustered around the controls. In the center of the group stood a familiar figure, Varek. But he wasn't physically there. His image flickered like a ghost, projected from a pulsating black crystal mounted on the console. Varek turned toward them, his crimson eyes gleaming. Ah, he said, voice dripping with malice. The bride and groom. Welcome to your wedding. Saris raised her blade. This ends now, Varek. Varek's projection smiled. Does it? The bond you cherish is the key to your destruction. He gestured to the crystal. This is a psychic amplifier. It's been feeding on your connection since you touched the nexus. Every thought, every emotion you've shared has charged this device. And when it reaches full capacity, the feedback will shatter your bond and Earth's defenses. The crystal pulsed, glowing brighter. Saris's eyes narrowed. We can destroy it. Varek chuckled. Can you? The moment you attack the crystal, the bond will break. And you will both die. David's mind reeled. The bond was their strength, but now it was also their weakness. We're trapped, he said through the bond. No, Saris answered. The bond can do more than connect us. It can be a weapon. David met her gaze. Understanding passed between them. We overload it, he said. Saris nodded. Exactly. We push every ounce of our energy into the bond. The crystal will either collapse, or we will. David hesitated. We might die. But Earth will survive, Saris said softly. David took her hand. The bond hummed between them, stronger than ever. Let's do it, he whispered. They focused inward. The bond, once a faint thread, now surged like a river of fire. Verek's projection flickered. No, stop. The crystal's glow intensified. David felt the psychic pressure build, hotter and sharper than anything before. Memories flooded the bond. His childhood on Earth, Saris's training as a protector, their shared fear and trust. The crystal trembled. Verek screamed, his voice splintering into static. The crystal cracked. The bond blazed like a star. The crystal exploded, releasing a shockwave of psychic energy that flooded the room. Riven soldiers collapsed, clutching their heads. Verek's projection shattered into fragments. The energy surged back through the bond. David screamed as pain ripped through his mind. Then everything went dark. The bond eternal. The silence was absolute. David Connors opened his eyes to a fractured world. The command core lay in ruins. Sparks danced across shattered consoles. Smoke curled toward the ceiling like ghostly fingers. The crystal that once housed Verek's psychic presence was gone, reduced to a pile of black shards. Beside him, Saris lay motionless. Saris. His voice cracked. He touched her wrist. Her skin was cold. The bond was gone. No, 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 David whispered, panic rising. He pressed his fingers to her temple. In the quiet of his mind, he searched desperately for the familiar warmth of her presence. Nothing. The bond, their shared connection, the thread that had guided them through battle after battle, was silent. David shook her gently. Saris, come back. We did it. We stopped him. His voice broke. I need you. She didn't move. A sharp pain stabbed his chest. He felt hollow, like something essential had been ripped from his soul. The psychic amplifier had collapsed, but Verek's trap had succeeded. The bond was broken. Outside the viewport, Earth's sky was changing. The crimson energy lines spread across the atmosphere, forming intricate symbols that glowed like runes carved into the heavens. The planetary shield grid crackled with unstable energy. David recognized the patterns. They matched the runes from the ancient Bond temple in Coronis. The realization struck like ice water. This was never just about the bond, David muttered. Verek used the bond to activate a planetary-scale disruption field. He stumbled toward the command console. The screens flickered erratically. The defense network interface flashed with a single message. Duo indi kuo ori cur uption imminent. Impact. Planetary shield failure in 7:32 minutes. The trap wasn't finished. Verek had left a final psychic echo within the planetary bond network. Once the timer hit 0, the shields would fail and Earth's skies would open to the full force of the Riven fleet. A flicker of Verek's voice slithered through the damaged speakers. You fought well, human, but you were never the bond's true master. The core belongs to us now. David slammed his fist on the console. You're dead, Verek. Am I? The voice taunted. I live within the echoes of the bond. My consciousness merged with the core before you shattered the crystal. You gave me access to Earth's psychic network when you tried to stop me. Now, all your world will burn. The display zoomed in on Earth's surface. Red beams targeted major cities: Beijing, New York, Tokyo, Lagos, Sao Paulo. The beams intensified, crackling against the shields. David's heart pounded. He didn't have the technical skills to stop a planetary-scale psychic virus, but Saris did. He knelt beside her again. Come on, Saris, he pleaded. I can't do this alone. Her breathing was shallow, faint, but there. You're still here, David whispered. The bond was broken, but their connection was more than just energy. It was trust, forged in battle, strengthened through sacrifice. David closed his eyes. He focused not on the broken psychic link, but on the memories they shared. The tunnels of Nis, the desperate escape through grav mines, the moment they stood hand in hand against Varek's mind. He reached out with his heart, willing the bond to return. Saris, if you can hear me, we still have a planet to save. A faint warmth stirred deep in his mind, like the first crack of light at dawn. David? His breath caught. The bond flickered, weak but real. I'm here, he answered. But we don't have time. Varek's virus is in the bond core. Earth's shields will fail in minutes. Saris's presence sharpened. He felt her exhaustion, her pain, but also her resolve. The virus is anchored in the psychic resonance field, she said. We need to overload the core like we did with the Nexus. But if we do that again, David hesitated. Yes, she said softly. It might kill us. The weight of her words settled in his chest. I won't lose you, David said. And Earth won't survive without us. The timer ticked down. 5:14. They locked eyes. Saris reached for his hand. The bond pulsed stronger. Together, they said as one. They knelt beside the central command core. The bond energy ran through the conduits like glowing veins. Channel all our mental energy into the core, Saris instructed. We overload the resonance frequency and break Varek's connection. David gripped her hand. Let's do it. They closed their eyes. The bond opened fully, no longer gentle but roaring like a storm. Thoughts merged, emotions fused. David felt Saris's mind as if it were his own. Her disciplined focus, the deep ache of loneliness from years of duty, and the fragile hope that humanity might teach the Zilari to live beyond fear. He sent her his own memories, his father's stories of humanity's resilience, the nights he spent staring at the stars, wondering if someone out there might one day need his help. The bond core responded, glowing brighter. The psychic virus recoiled, like a wounded beast. Varek's voice shrieked through the room. No, you can't stop me. The bond belongs to me. Saris's eyes snapped open, glowing electric blue. The bond belongs to those who fight for others. The energy surged. The core crackled, sending arcs of blue lightning through the walls. The virus contracted, then lashed out. David felt Varek's psychic claws rip through his mind. Pain exploded behind his eyes. You're nothing, Varek roared. A weak human with no purpose. David gritted his teeth. You're wrong, he growled. Humanity doesn't win because we're strong. We win because we stand together. The bond flared, turning white-hot. Saris shouted, now. They released everything. The core absorbed their psychic force and fired it through the planetary network. The crimson lines across Earth's sky shattered like glass. The psychic virus collapsed. Varek's final scream pierced the air, then vanished. The command console displayed. Planetary shields stable. YVNF fleet Rory to reading. David felt the bond's energy drain away. His vision dimmed. Saris, he whispered. Darkness swallowed him. David woke to the warmth of sunlight on his face. He blinked. He was lying on a grassy hill. The air smelled like rain and wildflowers. Where? He sat up. The sky above was Earth's familiar blue. You're awake. He turned. Saris sat beside him, her silver skin reflecting the sun's glow. Her eyes no longer glowed with psychic power, but the warmth of the bond lingered faintly. We did it, she said softly. David looked toward the horizon. In the distance, black streaks marked the sky where the Riven fleet had retreated. Earth was safe. He exhaled shakily. You're okay. I thought I lost you, Saris said. He smiled faintly. I thought the same. She stood and extended her hand. David took it. The bond was weaker now, like a whisper instead of a roar, but it was there. Saris gazed at the sky. The bond may never fully recover. David squeezed her hand. That's okay. We don't need perfect psychic powers. We just need each other. She smiled. Together, they walked toward the rising sun. Epilogue. The legacy of the bond. 6 months later, Earth and Zilara signed a permanent alliance. The eternal bond, once feared, became a symbol of unity between species. David and Cirrus became ambassadors for peace and protectors of the fragile bond that connected their worlds. Varroc's consciousness was gone, but his warning lingered. Fear is the enemy. Divide, and we fall. Humanity and Zilara chose unity, and the bond endured.